Today on Trail Tracker, I'm going to tell you a little story that should give you something to think about if you're considering buying a second-hand e-bike. Well, what better place to start a story than at the beginning? So let's rewind to the beginning of 2020 when all the trouble started with my beloved Rotwild e-bike. So I've got my e-bike back from service. So all the bouncy bits seen to, and I'm going to go and see if I can investigate a trail that I've never actually ridden before. Well, the joy of getting my e-bike back has been extremely short-lived. I'm now experiencing every e-biker's worst nightmare. For some reason, it's just packed in. I haven't run out of battery. It just switched itself off and I can't switch it back on. Fairly quickly, I realised that this is not a problem that I'm going to be able to fix here in the bike cave. The problem is, the shop I bought the bike from doesn't sell Rotwilds anymore, so I'm going to have to find a shop that does. I'll find a new dealer, give them a call and arrange to bring the bike in for them to have a look at. And a few days later, call me back and they tell me that the motor and the display are both dead and it's going to cost me 1,100 francs plus labour to get them replaced. Oh, and they've already spent 288 francs just trying to figure out what the problem is. Wow. Think about it for a few days and ultimately come to the conclusion that I have very little choice. Either I spend the money or I accept that this is scrap metal and spare parts. So I decide to get it repaired. And then this happened.
Good evening. The World Health Organization says Europe is now the epicenter of the global coronavirus pandemic.
Now, since the beginning of this week, all but the most essential shops have been closed here in Switzerland. So I was starting to come to terms with the reality of not being able to get my e-bike back from being mended for probably a few months. However, I received a phone call from them yesterday and they told me that it had been repaired and I could actually come and pick it up. So the saga of the e-bike continues. According to the display, I still had 2 or 5 bars of battery left and all of a sudden it just gave up the ghost. I get home, plug the bike in, and what happens? As I'm sure you can understand, I am not impressed. So I call the shop up and they couldn't be more unhelpful. As far as they're concerned, the bike was in perfect working order when it left the shop. But they would have a look at it for me if I wanted, on the understanding that I would pay the labour costs. How generous. Now this really was the final straw. I was flat out at work because of COVID-19 and I just didn't have the energy to invest in solving this problem. So I put the bike in the cellar and set about testing new e-bikes until eventually I bought my Orbea Wild FS. I managed to make it pretty much through the whole summer without thinking about my e-bike problems. But with autumn approaching, I started to think how it might be kind of cool to have a second e-bike to run in the bad weather and save a little bit of wear and tear on the new bike. So I spoke to a couple of friends in Austria and they suggested that I bring the bike to their local dealer for them to have a look at. So off I went to Austria. But they couldn't find anything wrong with the bike either. So they sent the battery off to the manufacturer BMZ for them to test it. And the answer came back that it was irreparable. Ouch. By this point, I am so deep in the hole with this bike that I figure the only way out of it is to stump up another 680 francs and get the battery replaced. Looking forward to getting out on the bike after having spent a small fortune on repairs. I get home, put the bike onto charge, and what happens? Nothing. So, I contact the shop again to see if they have any suggestions. So here I am now, following the advice of the second shop. Try and run the battery dry, and then when you plug it in, they said it might actually start to load. I have my doubts, but at this stage I'm willing to try anything. You know, oh, there we go. No more. Still nothing. This is beginning to look a little bit like deja vu. But what am I going to do? There's nothing for it. Time for another visit to Austria. Just to find out that all I needed to do was give it a little bit firmer a push to make the connection. All in all, I've spent far too much money repairing this bike, not to mention the amount of hassle. But if last January, instead of servicing the suspension, I decided to tidy the bike up and sell it on, I could have ended up selling somebody a bike that was on the verge of breaking down. And that would have been very uncool. Now, I'm not suggesting that all second-hand e-bikes are going to break down. In fact, I got 3 years of trouble-free riding out of mine. I just think you should do your homework and make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, especially if you're considering a bike with an early bros motor like mine had. Find out what parts have been replaced and ask to see receipts, because those replacement parts will carry a 2-year warranty, which should give you at least some peace of mind. Anyway, as they say, all's well that ends well. I've got the bike back, it's working really well, and I'm at the top of the descent. Well, motor problems aside, this bike might be 4 years old, but it still rides great downhill. Thanks for coming along, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.